Chapter 4 from Cabinet of Wonders Earth and Sun, Sun and Earth. It was dusk when Petra left the Stackens home. The sun had set and the clouds blushed pink. Above them, a dark blue nestled into the dome of the sky. One bright pinpoint of light twinkled like the lightning in Tomic's spear. Petra's father had told her that bright stars like that were planets just like Earth. Just like Earth? She wondered. Were the hills and the valleys the same? Did people have the same problems? Maybe on that planet things were different and no one ever took what didn't belong to them. A dog barked. But then the streets of Okno were quiet. The farmers had returned from the fields, and one window, the kitchen window, glowed with firelight in almost every house. She should hurry home to supper, but she hovered by the fountain in the center of town, dipped her hands in the cool, dark water. Over the bubbling of the fountain, Petra heard the cries of the swallows. The birds swooped in circles above her, seeking their evening meal. Astrophil buried deeper into her hair. Scared, Astro? Petra teased, trying to shake off her somber mood. Merely cautious, he whispered. Do you think some skinny swallow is drooling for a tasty treat like you? Silly. Insects give birds indigestion. I am not an insect. I am an arachnid. There is a distinct and well observed difference between the two. Astrophil, has anyone ever told you that you sound like a stuffy old schoolmaster when you're afraid? Thank you, but this is not fear. This is irritation. A swallow flapped close to Petra's head, and Astrophil squeaked. Now, can we go home, please? When Petra entered the kitchen, Dita was standing by the fire, scooping boiled carrots with strings of thyme out of the large iron pot that hung over the logs. Joseph and David were sitting at the oak table that was so thick that thudding your fist against it would make you feel the same way as striking the ground. You would only be aware of just how little an impression you were making on it. Joseph was rather like the table at which he sat. He was a big man, muscular and brown. Deep lines marked his face. Petra's father said that you could tell how old a tree was by counting the rings in a trunk that had been cut open. One ring meant 1 year. But if Petra were to count the wrinkles on Joseph's face in the same way, he would be ancient. And he was not even 40 years old. He glanced at Petra and continued chewing. He was about as talkative as the table, too. Dita scraped Petra up and down with her eyes. She clearly wanted to yell at her for being late, but then, with a slight shrug of her shoulders, she seemed to decide that the day had been an unusual one, and allowances could be made for Petra's behavior. Petra sat across from David. He shoved an enormous chunk of carrot in his mouth and looked disappointed that Petra wasn't going to get in trouble. After they had finished eating, Dita warmed a generous helping of chicken and carrots in the pot over the smoldering fire. She then arranged the food on the plate and dressed it with pickled onions. She passed the plate to Petra. Take that down to your father. Petra was worried that she might find him sleeping or worse, wake him up. But he was alert and pleased when she walked into his room. I have found a name for my enemy, boredom. He beckoned her to his side. You will make him run and hide. They didn't discuss the fact that he would make a mess of things if he tried to feed himself. He simply straightened up and sat down beside him, and she sat down beside him with the plate on her knees. It felt very strange to be feeding her father, like writing with her left hand. But he chatted between mouthfuls as if they were sitting across from each other in the kitchen having an ordinary meal. He asked about Thomas Stacken and laughed when she told him about her encounter with Jasper, but she didn't mention Tomic's glass spheres or why she had visited the sign of fire. She did, however, tell him about Master Stacken's angry explosion and then added, I just don't understand something. He knew that the prince was a terrible person. Why didn't you? Why did you accept the prince's offer to build the clock? He did not reply right away. Well, Petra, he began slowly, you need to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes. Of course, there was that awful incident during the year of the drought when we lost several good people. They were friends of mine, Petra, people I wish you knew now. But the prince was a 12-year-old boy then, and controlled by his father's counselors in Prague. All decisions were made by them until he turned 14. Bohemia was its own country, but remained part of the Habsburg Empire, which was under the reign of the prince's father, Emperor Karl, ruled from his court in Vienna, and had 3 sons. When each was born, he gave him a country. The eldest, Prince Maximilian, ruled Germany. Hungary belonged to Prince Frederick, and the youngest, Prince Rodolfo, had Bohemia. When Karl felt his death to be near, he would choose which of his sons would become the ruler of the entire Habsburg Empire after him, judging how well each had managed his own country. It's easier, Mikhail Kronos continued, to blame your sorrows on one person than on a group of them. Then you can believe that if only that person were to disappear, everything would be different, better. Maybe that's true sometimes, but more often than not, it's just wishful thinking. Let us say the prince had given the order to imprison, even kill, the people plotting rebellion when the fields dried up. It was a brutal choice, but how could I hold a young man accountable for a decision he made as a child? He was the same age as I am now. I am old, her father said, sighing, and I still make mistakes in judgment. Petra did not like to hear him say that. Her father's straight, salt and pepper hair flowed over his shoulders, and Petra only had to look at it to admit that there were more gray hairs than black. She knew that he had been older than most fathers when she was born. She had not been his first child. Her mother had given birth to 3 sons. Each had been stillborn or died soon after he was born, and the third had been Petra's twin. There had been no midwife or doctor in the town then, or now. There was an old woman, Varenka, who brewed medicine and helped deliver babies, though she was not particularly good at either. Of course, I had my suspicions about the prince, her father said. If you remember, I went to Prague to meet with him first before agreeing to take the job. But how could you have agreed? Look at what he did to you. How could you have met him and not seen him for what he was? It's not always easy to see people for who they are, for what they are. I hope you will be better at it than I have been. Prince Rodolfo is charming and persuasive. He seemed keenly smart and friendly. I was ready to believe, after that first meeting, that people had misjudged him and blamed him for things that he could not control, like the weather or the decision of his advisers when he was younger. Also, her father paused. I was intrigued by the project. When it was suggested to me, I couldn't let go of the idea. It haunted my mind, and I had so many visions that I simply had to realize them. Petra was silent because she had the sense that although what her father had told her was true, the pause he had taken before he spoke meant that what he had said wasn't the whole truth. It's just a clock. You could have built one for the mayor of Oakno if you had wanted to, but such a clock with such resources and talent from all over the empire? No, never, because he bit his lip. Petra, you must be very careful not to tell anyone what I'm going to tell you. She was curious. Of course I won't. No one, he gripped her hand, not even Tomek. I won't, I promise. His hand relaxed a little, but still held hers. The clock is more than what it seems. You know, don't you, that the relationship between the weather and time is a very close one. What we call a month is the time it takes for the moon to wax and then wane. The moon controls the tides, and the tides change the shape of the land, sometimes taking pieces of it away, sometimes giving pieces of it back. The tides bring rain clouds, and then winds push them over the land. For years, we have thought that the sun moves around the earth, but I learned at the prince's court that it is not so. It's the exact opposite. The exact opposite is true. The earth revolves around the sun, and we split the time that we see the sun and the time that we do not into hours. And it is the sun that decides how hot it will be. Petra's head was spinning. What was he talking about? The earth goes around the sun? That made no sense whatsoever. The prince had an idea. You must admit it is an ingenious one. I never would have thought of it, but once he suggested it, I saw its potential. I saw how much better it could make Bohemia, and I felt sure that the prince could not have a bad heart, that if he had made the wrong decisions, he wanted to make up for them. You see, he wondered if it was not possible to make a clock powerful enough to influence the weather. The elements of the weather, the sun and moon, affect time. So perhaps we could make the very opposite happen. We could reverse the path of the influence and make time change the sun and moon. The prince said that with a clock like this, there would never be another drought. The weather could be monitored to make the exact amount of rain, sun, and cloud needed to produce bumper crops of brassica every year. So this was why her father had been so preoccupied with lightning and magic before leaving for Prague. As Petra listened to her father, she felt worse and worse. One of the things she had always loved about him, the way he would mutter to himself as if no one were around, or dip a quill into a glass of milk and not notice because of some idea in his head, was starting to seem like not such a good thing at all. He often worked on projects so much that he didn't see the world around him. But never before had this resulted in something dangerous. I wasn't even sure I could do it when I took on the project. Michael Kronos continued. I promised I would try, nothing more. I promised I would provide him with a clock able to stun all of Europe with its beauty. But as for producing something that could control the weather, well, that's a tall order to say the least. As far as most people are concerned, the new clock in Starro Square will just tell the time. So it can't control the weather then? Petra asked with relief. If it, in fact, it can, or rather, it could. But, Father, she hated to say this, but forced herself. Don't you think that maybe the prince won't use the clock to make sure the harvest is perfect every year? What if he does the exact opposite? That thought did occur to me. His finger strayed across his face and touched his bandage. Afterward, but Petra, the prince has nothing to gain from failed crops. The wealth of his country relies on brassica production, and the prince relies too heavily on his own cleverness. The clock's ability to control the weather lies in one final part, which still needs to be assembled and installed. This part is like a puzzle, but no ordinary person could solve it. Assembling the part requires more than intelligence, it demands intuition and the power to see the metal pieces as I do. Does Prince Rodolfo wish to prove that he possesses all of these things? Does this 18-year-old want to outshine his older brothers and be chosen as the next emperor? Of course he does. Blind as I am now, I can't believe how blind I was to these facts before. I will finish the clock myself, the prince told me. I respect your talent. I admire the way you see the world. You have an eye for beauty, but you are no longer necessary. I have to believe that what he said isn't true. Prince Rodolfo stole my sight, but he is not me. The clock could work to control the weather, Petra, but the prince will not understand how to make it work. That's it.